question. Okay, we'll start with a question. What was that chapter all about? What was the 11th chapter about? What would you say was the key word in that chapter? Because we're gonna kind of continue with that same thought.
What, boasting, he was boasting about
Okay,
his credentials as far as being able to talk about Jesus.
okay. Paul's boasting in a way reluctantly, but that's what he described it as. What does that do for us today? That's an interesting insight into Paul's thinking about his concern for the people and the church at Corinth. It tells us about his thinking and his motivation.
Boasting, I think it's an unusual word to use here because we generally have negative feelings about someone who boasts. And oftentimes, I think part of the negative thing is, well, you know, is this person really saying what's true? You know, if they have to be so strong about, oh, I'm so great, or I'm so smart, I'm this or that. Is that really true?
Yeah.
And do they really believe it? Or, they're just kind of putting on a show. But with Paul, I think maybe it can give us confidence that we can speak the truth about Jesus, because we have confidence in what Paul says.
Okay. Yes.
I think, and like the way I'm saying, Paul boasting simple because he know that he's in the right track. But he know that the members of the church, some of them are not thinking at the right track.
Okay.
They were thinking negatively about him, Paul. But he know that what he's doing is doing the right thing. Because he can see that some of the leadership or even the preachers are preaching different in the church. The people are copying that, they are sending them to Satan. So he's warning them that if they want to post, they suppose that they are on the right track, so that there won't be any change from what the apostle has preached to them from anywhere.
Okay. Put them on the right track. We're talking, kind of reviewing 2 Corinthians chapter 11, which was covered last week. But the question that came to my mind is, what would we say? Because I think the key word in this chapter, and the thought is continuing on in the next chapter, is credibility. That's what Paul is addressing, his credibility. Why should they believe him? Why should they put credence, if you will, or believe what he's telling them? And so that's what he's trying to bolster, his credibility, his believability, because of the things that he's endured for Jesus. And that's what came to mind as I thought about this chapter last week and this week is, what would you say? What would I say in a similar situation? If we were writing to a church, or if we were talking to someone and trying to say, we're not apostles as Paul was, but we want to have testimony for Jesus. And we don't want to boast, but what would we say either in our own minds or if we were going to talk about it? Paul talked about, you know, shipwrecks and beatings and all kinds of things that he endured for the sake of Jesus. What would we say? Well, we could say we've come to a lot of church services. We've sat in the pew a lot of times and heard a lot of sermons. Maybe, I mean, each one of us could say something more, I'm sure.
Yeah, like you are saying, each one of us can say something more.
Yeah,
Because, I mean, with Christ, I've left a lot of things behind because of Christ.
okay,
On my own self. Because if I'm not in Christ, I know where I am right now, and I know what I can do without Christ. But with Christ, always if I speak, I always turn the page to Africa, the way we are. You see, our generation, the gods that we believe in, you see, the fake miracle, we call it fake, but it's reality.
yeah,
As the Bible confirms it, you see. So, I know my grandfather is a fetish priest. We grew up with him. We see a lot of things. But if God touch some of us and we turn around those things, but later we say we are Christians. So in the family right now, if they call a meeting, some of us, they don't call us because they say if we can't, they are Christians. So whatever we are doing here, they will not show any concern. You see? So it makes me almost boast always in the family that I'm a Christian.
yeah.
If I'm preaching about my boldness. That's it. So Paul in his time, that is what he can pass through. But now what I can pass through is what I'm passing through. And you do what we are passing through is what you are passing through.
So, I mean, that's a question that we should ask ourselves. What will we say in Paul's situation? Sometimes it's some things that we've done. Sometimes, as you say, some things we've given up for Christ. You know, sometimes it's, you know, people have had to give up families, give up certain relationships, give up some things that other people do. The way you spend your time. Some, a lot of us in this room taught some classes over the years. What are some of the things that demonstrate credibility?
I think it's just a matter of continuing in your faith, no matter what else is happening. Especially when people say, "You still believe in God after this? You still believe in God?" Yeah, I believe in God.
Okay.
Because of something that's happening. It's continuing your faith.
Last week I raised some issue. Mom remember. I said some of Britain over there has a wife of 3 wives, 2 wives before getting to know Christ. In this way, are they going to give up their wives or they have to keep them, still keeping them in the church? For instance, we have a brother from here, I think from Texas, came to visit her in Africa. They said they came with that thing purposely. If you are having 2 wives, 3 wives, 4 wives, doesn't mean that you should separate from them. You can still be a Christian and baptize and keep your wife. And so we rise up and say that no, if the Bible was saying that marry 1 wife, my faith will stand that this is where the prayer and tribulation will come to me to test my faith.
Yeah.
That if I have to go away with a second wife, so that I can get my salvation.
Yeah.
You see?
Yeah.
So there's a king, one side, he has 3 wives, but he became a Church of Christ member and he do away with 2 wives. The wife understand him, he have a burden for each and every one of them. The family that he have with them, with the kids and the this, he's taking care of them and give them the word that each of you, if you want to marry, you can marry freely. I'm not taking your house from you or anything from you. He's still taking care of them until they get married.
Boy, those are some tough choices and
You see,
tough situations.
so sometimes situation like those who came from here and came and preached that to us, that means they were pushing our faith into something else. If we want to believe what they were saying
Yeah.
without the Bible, that means we will take our tradition, mingle with the Jesus Christ tradition.
Did he keep the first wife or how did he
You
get?
keep the first one
I mean,
with understanding. You look very beautiful. They are all in the church too.
wow.
All the two and everybody is in the church.
Wow.
They are all in the church.
Well, that's credibility, isn't it? Anyway, I just, that's what came to mind as I thought about this chapter. What would we say in comparison to what Paul said? The other thing, the end of that chapter, it says, besides everything else, I face the daily pressure of my concern for all the churches. And I guess Paul could say, well, he was, in a sense, the one who established some of these churches. But, you know, most of us, many people come to the church and say, what can I get out of it? Rather than, as Paul said, I face the daily pressure of concern for all the churches. Do we feel any pressure for concern for Northwest? How about for some of the other works that we support? Do we feel any pressure as to what's going on in Honduras or some no Togo better or wherever we're from? Concern for the churches is something that Paul had constantly on his mind. And then the last verse there. I was lowered in a basket from a window in the wall and slipped through his hands. In other words, we're just touching on the last verse of chapter 11 there. Paul, how do you think he viewed that? I'm glad, I think he viewed it in two different ways. He was glad to get out and not suffer persecution or arrest and punishment in Damascus. But in the same sense, it was kind of humiliating for Paul. I think he was touched by that he would have to be lowered. He's the kind of man that kind of would want to stay and face it. And yet his associates got him out of town that way. So anyway, he's humiliated for the sake of Christ and had to accept that. And that's a question that we could, are we willing to suffer, threats to our dignity is what I'm trying to get at, for the sake of Christ. Sometimes that's what the Lord has to do with us, to humble us, to make us more effective servants. In that way, in a sense, Paul is humbled by being lowered in a basket. We can see him later, the disciples want to get him out of town at Ephesus before he gets caught up in the riot, possibly killed.
It's kind of a reminder to him that he has to rely on God.
Yeah.
And, this is God's, I think God's providence that, he provided a way for him to get out of the city safely.
Yeah.
Where, Paul might want to say, well, I have the strength to stand up to
Right.
this king who's, trying to kill me and these other people. But he has to, like he says, he boasts about his weakness, that here he had to give up that kind of show of bravado and say, well, I think really I'm not strong, so I'm gonna rely on God who's providing this way out.
So, you know, sometimes Paul, the Lord has to deal with our pride and, you know, bring us down a peg or two.
Sometimes to this side like this, when Paul was viewed from the window, you can see it's like a political sign, political field. If you are in politics, let me say, government and opposition, if you are opposition to the government, there are certain things, if you don't know, you get into, the government will let you pay. But if among them in the government, if you go through that thing, even people will not even hear of it. People will not hear of it. So it seems like Paul now is against the policy, or he's giving a new lecture to the government. Let me say the public that he is preaching to as the government.
Mhm.
So he's giving them a new purpose, that is Jesus Christ, for
Yeah,
them to change, but they are not willing to change.
Yeah,
So they
that's
have let him pay. So in that way, you have to run for your life. So God have a way of it for running. He is even lucky by running from window. So nowadays, things like that happen in our life. Always I said that we those who read the Bible and just believe, our faith is very strong, but people don't believe. You know yourself that the reason why you read the Bible, you haven't seen Jesus Christ, you haven't seen the apostle, you haven't seen any of them, but you read the book and you believe that it works, then you have a faith. You have a faith.
yeah. Okay, chapter 12 continues the same theme of Paul's credibility. He's talked about some of the dangers and persecutions that he's endured. His point being, you know, unless I was really a Christian, I wouldn't be willing to face these things. Anyway, he goes on now with a different, gets into the spiritual realm, if you will. I must go on boasting, he says. Although there is nothing to be gained, I will go on to visions and revelations from the Lord. I know a man in Christ who 14 years ago was caught up to the third heaven. What's the third heaven?
The third heaven.
He's going to talk about it later as paradise. It's beyond, you know, the earth, the sky, it's in the spiritual realm. I was caught up into paradise. In other words, he's close to God.
What, but he says it in the third person, why does he change and
Okay.
not say,
Yeah,
I
that's
was
interesting.
caught up to the third heaven?
I know a man in Christ who 14 years ago was caught up. Whether it was in the body or out of the body, I do not know. I think that's part of his boasting. He's a little bit reluctant to say it was me,
Yeah.
but he wants to say it happened.
But he's talking
Yeah.
about himself.
So I think he wants it to be understood, but he doesn't want to say it. So it's a,
He fear. Sometimes he fear to say things direct because you don't know how the mob will react. Even before Christ, the mob, they will react to Christ. You see? So he fear for his life sometimes. That's why he used his conscience very wisely. Yeah.
is he the only one that this has ever happened to? Like so many things we read in the New Testament, here's a passage from Ezekiel chapter 8, verse 3. He stretched out what looked like a hand and took me by the hair of my head. The Spirit lifted me up between earth and heaven, and in visions of God, he took me to Jerusalem, to the entrance to the north gate of the inner court, where the idol that provokes to jealousy stood. And there before me was the glory of the Lord, of the God of Israel. as in the vision I had seen in the plain. So this is something that is, those who are faithful to God have had opportunities to see things. We're gonna later in the New Testament read about John, who sees some things that were extraordinary. So Paul, he can't say what he's seen. When they're in the body or out of the body, he doesn't know if this was a physical movement or was it just in spirit. And Ezekiel was kind of the same way. Anyway,
I think we could call it kind of a humble brag.
yes.
He's
that's-
bragging away,
Yeah.
bragging that he's seen things that nobody else has seen.
Yes, yes.
And it's the only time in the Bible he talks about this, all his writings, it's the one time. So he just kind of puts it in there, I think, for a good reason, and I'm glad he did. So we can benefit from it today, but I just want how you see it, the humble brag, if there's such a thing, you know?
We'd like to know a lot more about this.
Yeah, it's interesting.
What did he see? What was said? But he just wants to make the point that this has happened to him. And so again, trying to strengthen his credibility as a preacher
Yeah,
and a
that's
teacher.
the whole purpose.
I know that this man, whether in the body or apart from the body, do not know, but God knows, was caught up to paradise. He heard inexpressible things, things that man is not permitted to tell. I will boast about a man like that, but I will not boast about myself, except about my weaknesses. So God, Paul has experienced some great things, but he's gonna go on. Even if I should choose to boast, I would not be a fool because I would be speaking the truth. So many boasts are exaggerations, but Paul's is the literal truth.
He could say, I'm God's gift to the world, but he doesn't. He wants to exalt
Yeah.
Christ. Christ is
Yeah.
God's gift to the world, even though Paul is a special kind of gift. I mean, he's like under Christ, I would say, But he was given some miraculous powers at times.
Oh, yeah.
And so he is a special person, but he doesn't want to, exalt in that, he wants to exalt Christ. That's a beautiful thing.
But I refrain, so no one will think more of me than is warranted by what I do or say. So that's a tough thing. And we hear about that in sermons. We don't want to appear to others trying to, to say, well, I'm more holy than you, or I'm better than you.
No, he never does.
How do you avoid that and yet talk about what Christ has done for us? That's sometimes a difficult thing to say. To avoid bragging, to avoid it, most times we kind of exaggerate when we're talking about ourselves, don't we? Even in the Christian area, we don't want to confess our needs, our weaknesses.
That's often a criticism that you hear of Christians is,
Yeah.
they're holier than thou.
Yeah.
They think they're better than I am because of it. And that's driving people away, not bringing them closer.
How do you counter that?
By being humble as you can.
Yeah.
I don't think we want to give that impression, I don't think we are that way, but maybe some Christians have been that way, and all it takes is one kind of stand out, and then we get a bad reputation. As a holier than thou kind of people or something, but we gotta constantly, combat that, by being humble.
Examples
Paul
of
was the same thing.
service, of, Jesus washed people's feet.
Don't forget about that.
Yeah, you see,
Lowers,
sometimes, even when we go to public preaching, when you go to house to preach to people, and you a Christian, that's you that has the message, and you are already a Christian, you are saved by the mercy of the Lord, and you are under Him. You are sending the message to others. There was one time, this issue was on the way that we have to discuss with some of my colleagues. And is telling the one we're preaching to change it like that. We are all sinners. We are all sinners.
Yeah.
To me, if you come to me and you're a Christian, and you already have the salvation at hand, and you came to tell me that still we are all sinners, then we are equal. I don't need to change.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't need to change. But that word is on people's mouth always after you have delivered from your sin. You are still preaching to people, oh, we are all sinners. Christ came to die for us, so we are still what? Sinners. I don't think we have any, profit of changing our life to be a Christian. You see, so sometimes the way the passage we're speaking about right now remind me when we go out or we are speaking about Christ or ourselves, we must know what to say so that the people will not rather run away or they should see the boast in us, in Christ. No matter how it is, you have to boast yourself in Christ, that you are in Christ. And I have a question. My question is, why first heaven, second heaven, and the third heaven? What I know in Christ is heaven. Why first heaven, second heaven, and the third heaven, as Paul was speaking here?
What's that now?
Why does he break it up into first, second, third?
Classic formulation is that the sky is the first heaven, space is the second.
Is it a Hebrew thing?
I think that's what he's referring to.
That is what he's referring to. That's the belief of the Jews.
Yeah.
That is their belief.
Right.
But we Christians, is that our belief? So the first heaven where the birds and the this thing are the first heaven, where the space and the moon are. So the people are trying right now to get to the moon are they going to second heaven? Are they going to second heaven?
Well,
I don't know. I was just
It's
thinking.
called the heavens. You know, you look up into the sky and people call it the heavens. It's not necessarily the heaven where God lives.
So yeah. Well,
What
God
do you
is-
think?
So God is living in the third one. That one nobody can reach there until
I
you
think
die.
that's what he's referring to.
And physical place.
The first two are physical.
Yeah.
This
Yeah.
third is spiritual.
So the first and second one is physical heaven. If you go to the moon right now, so you are in second heaven.
In a sense, you're in the heavens, what people call the heaven. Yeah, I think it's just a way of speaking. He wants, his point is he's caught up to paradise. He calls it
I know
paradise.
before bringing the question because I read a Jew this thing. When I read a Jew book, I saw the second
Yeah,
heaven and
yeah.
they believe in that. That's what their belief is. You see?
But he calls
They believe
it
in that.
paradise.
Yeah. You see?
And if we think about Jesus talking about the rich man and Lazarus, you know, Lazarus is in paradise, which is defined by some as a place of departed spirits, of righteous spirits. If you
You know, some people have interpreted this passage that there are 3 layers in heaven. You know, I don't think we want to
Well-
see that, but we don't have to think of it that way, but
okay,
you could read it that way.
yeah,
I don't like it.
there's degrees of reward, degrees of punishment.
Doesn't
We'll
matter.
find out soon enough.
That's right.
The important thing is you get there. You find yourself in heaven someday. It doesn't matter how many layers there are.
Yeah,
You know, or if you got more jewels in your crown than somebody else, it doesn't matter, right? The thing is you get there.
It's gonna be
That may
paradise,
happen. Some
paradise.
people might be honored more than others.
Or as one minister here said, the extent to which you endured a lot of suffering and a lot of difficulties for Christ, you're gonna appreciate the reward more than the person who just has come to Christ at the end of life, let's say, hasn't had the opportunity to endure a lot. That's how he interpreted it. You'll appreciate it more the more you've given up, the more you've served for Jesus.
Or you'll anticipate
Yeah,
being in heaven someday.
yeah.
There's a blessing there.
Anyway, Paul to keep me from becoming conceited because of these surpassingly great revelations. Boy, we wish we knew what they were, related to the future, related to what was gonna happen to him and certain people. We don't really have any idea. But there was given me a thorn in my flesh, a messenger of Satan. That's interesting. That Satan is allowed to beset. But again, it's not beyond what he could bear, because he's not tempted beyond what he could bear. He talked to the Corinthians. A messenger of Satan to torment me. Wonder what it was. Nobody knows. I know you speculate. Some people have said it was his eyesight and he didn't have glasses. Some people have said it was a speech impediment. Some people have depicted him as everything from hunchback, that he was, because he says I was not an impressive speaker. Anyway, it's really no use. But it was something that tormented him. 3 times I pleaded with the Lord to take it away from me. But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. You almost get the sense of like what was depicted at the beginning of Job. There's Satan and God there, and Satan said, Job, he wouldn't be faithful to you if he had to suffer anything. And, is that the same thing that occurs here in the life of Paul? Paul, if he gave him a thorn in the flesh, whatever, he wouldn't be as strong a preacher or as faithful a preacher. The question is, what about us? Sometimes we're called upon to endure some thorns in the flesh, physical, sometimes some suffering of emotional, from various things. You wonder, is that something that is happening in the spiritual realm that we don't see? That that God has allowed Satan to do this because Satan is saying to God, she wouldn't be faithful if she had to endure this, or he wouldn't be so much if he had to endure this. Messenger of Satan. And so maybe that's happening. So it's a way to view it, but in a sense, it's the Lord doesn't tempt you above what you can bear. He's saying you can endure this, you can get through it, and maybe be a good example or a help to somebody else because of the things that you're called upon to endure. You turn Satan's actions or Satan's messengers, if you will, to good. That's what we want to do. That's what Paul did. He goes on, whatever this was. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest on me. That is why, for Christ's sake, I delight in weaknesses, in insults, in hardships, in persecutions, in difficulties. But when I am weak, then I am strong. He's able to say that when I am abased or lowered, it elevates Christ because he continues faithful. That's a tough one to get a grasp on, isn't it? I delight in weaknesses, insults, hardships, and persecutions, in difficulties. For when I am weak, then I am strong. Then you're able to rely on Christ more and maybe tell more about Christ to others. What do you think? Well, that's the end of that. We'll kind of leave it with that question. How do you get a hold of that thought? So we'll take it up there. The next paragraph is entitled in this edition, Paul's concern for the Corinthians, but anyway, thanks for your thoughts.